Oh, Ben, thank you for joining me and having this conversation and giving up some of your time. I know you're a very busy man. Um, why you laugh?
Loosely.
So obviously, I know who you are. We're great friends. We've worked together before. Just for the people listening, if you could just give us a little background on yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do, just to give a little bit of context to our conversation.
Yeah, so I've been a sport and performance psychologist now for 10 years, I'd say. I've been self-employed for all that time. It wasn't really planned that I was going to be self-employed. It just so happened that the first role that kind of presented itself to me was a self-employed one. So yeah, that just kind of happened. I got my master's degree from Liverpool John Moores as well as my undergraduate, which actually wasn't a psychology one. It was a science and football one, and kind of flipped to more of a psychology route way halfway through that, which we can probably talk about. And then prior to that, I had my own kind of flirt with a career in sport myself. I was a football player. When I was at school, I used to play for Walsall, like 14, 15, 16. Then I got released from Walsall, and then I was lucky enough to sign for West Brom. So I left school when I was 16 and played there until 19 when I was released. So obviously my professional career didn't go where I wanted it to go. I wasn't able to get a professional contract anywhere else, so that was quite a bit of a culture shock going from a Premier League football club at the time to working in a factory, a music production factory, which was completely alien. And I started playing semi-professional football, and working in a factory. That was quite a difficult period, but I didn't really know what I was going to do because I'd only left school with 3 GCSEs, so I didn't see myself as being academic. But it was my girlfriend at the time that was going to university, and it was quite a big thing for her because she was the first one in her family, and she had kind of shown that that could be a path or a potential path for me. And then somehow I grabbed enough UCAS points together to scrape my way into university. I had to do a foundation year, and the only foundation course that was going was something in like engineering and technology, which was basically maths, which was horrendous to me. I scraped through with like 38 point something, and then like a huge compensation to get onto science and football. And then for the last 10 years I've worked across football. So I've worked at West Brom, obviously worked with you at Aston Villa for a couple of years, and then probably the biggest thing that I've done is worked with transitioning athletes. So I used to work for a company called Athlete Career Transition, who were basically set up by former athletes to help current athletes retire into a life outside of football. That was really important to me because I'd experienced something similar. Well, I'd had that same journey myself, going from sport to trying to figure out what you wanted to do, because even if you have a long career in sport, you still like can be mid-30s and you've got a long life left to live. So I used to support athletes from a psychological point of view, and we used to place them in like corporate business roles with companies. And I would kind of go with them along the whole journey of initial me placing them in the business and then just supporting them as long as possible. And then along the way, I've also worked with individuals in different sports, and then the last couple of years I've been working mainly in corporate business with my business partner, still using sports psych as a principle, but basically helping people in a different context. Very similar to sport, people just want to do their best, see what their potential is, try and perform. That's kind of a whirlwind tour of what I've been doing.
Brilliant. I didn't know a lot of that stuff, actually. I didn't know you only got 3 GCSEs.
Oh, see, you never listened to those pitch side chats that we used to have, did you?
I don't think you've ever told me that before. So obviously you mentioned about having a flirt with a career with football. Do you think, and this is not me putting words into your mouth, I want you to kind of tell me, do you think that that's the reason, or that's what drew you across to the discipline of psychology? Obviously, you said you started in science and football. There's lots of different things that fall under the umbrella of sports science, lots of different disciplines. And for me, psychology, now I'm older, I love the concepts of it. I love talking about it. I love hearing about it, reading about it. But when I was at university, psychology was probably the module that I despised the most, because
Yeah.
I think because I wanted to be more scientific, I suppose. I wanted objective answers, and psychology sometimes doesn't give you that. So I struggled at uni with the psychology
Yeah.
modules. But now I'm older, I suppose, maybe more philosophical, shall we say. I do enjoy the psychology side of things. But what do you think drew you to that discipline, especially whilst you were doing your kind of undergrad in science and football?
Yeah, well, I didn't know it at the time, but probably my journey into being a psychologist started when I was 16 without knowing it. I found my time as a football player quite difficult. Firstly, I didn't enjoy moving away from home at such a young age and moving into digs. And I'm sure we'll go on and talk about it as from like a practitioner lens, but as a player, like the pressure to perform every single day and like the microscope that's on you every day of like how you act, how you walk, how you talk, how you react to things, every single thing that you do is assessed essentially. Um, so the pressure is like unbelievable, and like 16 years old, 17, 18, 19, and it's really difficult to understand how to navigate that. And for me, like as a player and then as a practitioner, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't know how to navigate that, then you're probably going to struggle. And I think that's probably the difference between potentially making it and not making it, being able to navigate those challenges. So in retrospect, when I look back, I'm like, if I had access to a psychologist, could there have been would that have made any difference to me as a player? But when I got to university, I thought that I wanted to be a like similar to what you did, like physiologist or sports scientist, because believe it or not, I was actually quite fit as a football player, and I really enjoyed that side of it. So I thought, right, what can I do? Maybe I can become, I don't know, a fitness coach or be the one that gets the players fit or brings them back from injury. But when I got to university, similar to what you've just said about psychology, I couldn't stand the theory around it. It just really, I just didn't connect with it. So I kind of, first year, I was like floating around, not really knowing what to do, kind of struggling with being a student as well. And it wasn't until my second year when I was sat in a lecture. I can't remember what the lecture was. It might have been developmental issues in sport, but it was about transitions, and it was being delivered by a guy called Martin Littlewood from John Moores. He's still there now. He had a similar background to me. He was a player at Leeds United, got released, and then had kind of gone down the academic route and then become a consultant sports psychologist. And he was talking about transitions in sport, specifically football, retirement. And that was the moment where it just clicked for me, because up until that point, I was kind of just coasting through life without really knowing what was happening to me, what I'd gone through, what I was going through. And it was like the light bulb moment that people talk about, where it was like, God, this guy is literally explaining my life to me, what I've been through, what I'm going through now. And that obviously caught my attention. I didn't really know anything about psychology then, but that obviously fell under the discipline of sports psychology. And I was like, wow, so I just started reading about that type of stuff, about the transition literature. And then that kind of changed my route way for my degree. So all the modules that you then choose going into your second and third year, your dissertation for me was all geared around psychology then. I did my dissertation on the transitional experiences of young football players. So I went round interviewing actually some of the lads that I used to play with, and similar experiences that I had had myself, but no one was really talking about it. There was a little bit of research about it, but not a lot. So that obviously grabbed my attention. But then, weirdly enough, I'd started playing football at a decent level again in my third year. I started playing for Vauxhall Motors. I was playing for the university team, and I was like, oh, I'm only 25. Maybe I could still forge a career in football. So when I left my degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do again. Like, I didn't know the pathway or what the pathway was to becoming a sports psychologist. I didn't know anything about bases. I didn't know anything about the BPS. Didn't know anything about having to do your professional chartership. So I kind of left university and went back to work at the company that I was working at before, but in like a better role, slightly more paid role, but still not great. And I tried to like create a career again in football, but I dislocated my shoulder twice, and had to have reconstructive surgery, and then that was kind of it then. And then I was like, what am I going to do? And I thought maybe I can become a sports psychologist. And then I started reconnecting with some of the people at John Moores, and that's when I found out about the pathway. And I'm sure all the psychs that be listening to this know about the pathway, but if you haven't got an undergraduate that is psychology aligned to like the bases or BPS standards, then you can't actually become chartered through the BPS. So I went on and did a master's in sports psychology, but it meant that post masters I'd only be able to get bases accreditation as a sport and exercise scientist specialising in psychology. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
Yep.
Pathways have changed now, so the BPS and kind of bases have come together, and you can do what's called either CPAR or APEC. So even if you haven't got an undergraduate psychology degree, you can do a module through the Open University, which I've done as a bit of a top-up, and then you can then get on the pathway to become in HCPC registered, which is like the gold standard. But yeah, in answer to your original question, my pathway into psychology was literally through that lecture. And if I hadn't gone to that lecture, then maybe I wouldn't have done what I've done now, because there's plenty of lectures that I didn't get up for.
Maybe you'd still be chasing that football dream.
Yeah, maybe. And that's what kind of led me into my first role. So when I went and did my sports psychology masters, I kind of focused around the transition literature because of my kind of personal attachment to it. And then I got to the end of it, I was like, right, is anyone actually doing any work in this space? Like, lots of bodies are doing good work, like the EIS have performance lifestyle advisors, the RPA have personal development managers, so do the PCA, Professional Cricket Association. So all those practitioners are there to kind of help athletes develop as people when they're still athletes, with a view to like helping them transition into something else. But once you kind of finished in the system, there wasn't anything at that time anyway that kind of carried that support on. So that's when I came across Athlete Career Transition, who was set up by Andy and Steve Moore, two ex-Welsh international rugby players. And as soon as I found out what they were doing, I kind of just, wanted to be a part of it. And yeah, that was kind of my first big role as a sports psychologist.
Excellent. So one question I have for you is, how does it feel for you working with, let's say, when you were full-time in sport, how does it feel working with people that are potentially going through the same things that you went through? Obviously, you have a background of being a footballer, feeling a huge amount of pressure doing that. And like you said, sometimes it does come down to how you walk, how you react to certain things. You're always being watched, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
I do believe that in sport, and especially in football, you're right, like it's microscopic to a certain degree. The players are analysed for everything that they do. So you having gone through that, how has that strengthened your kind of role and your practices when working with people who have also been through those similar things or are going through those similar things?
Yeah, I think if I reflect on it now, and I have done because I haven't been working in football for a couple of years now, and I think it was a double-edged sword. So it gave me a real deep empathy and understanding for what players go through on a daily basis. So it helped me, and once they knew that, it enabled me to develop really good relationships, I think, because I think they had an understanding that I could relate to what they were going through or what they've been through. So I think that really helped strengthen that aspect of it. And for me, if you haven't got a relationship with an athlete, then you're not doing any good work with them. Anyway, you can have all the knowledge and theory and everything, but if you haven't got that, then it can be a challenge. So that definitely helped. But I think on the flip side, it also made it hard for me as well, because being on the other side, on the staff side, I think, how do I explain this? Like high level sport is difficult, isn't it? Like there's a lot of pressure to perform, to get results, and it can be quite brutal at times. So I guess it can create maybe that can create sometimes less empathy within the culture, and everyone's under pressure. That's the ironic thing. Even the coach or the member of staff is probably experiencing what the players are experiencing, but just in a different context. But I think sometimes it can create scenarios or behaviours that kind of don't help players. And I guess maybe sometimes it bothered me too much of the way that players are treated by staff members.
Because of your past experiences.
Yeah, because of the past experiences, and then because I know what players are going through as well. It's difficult as a psychologist working in elite sport, because you have to. It's like, who's your client? Like, you work for the football club, so they pay you the money, but then you've got players that you're supporting, but then also you kind of supporting staff, because a lot of the time they give you access to the players. Because not all players want to work with you, and that's fine. So sometimes you need to have good relationships with staff in order to work with the players. So it's really difficult to manage how you position yourself in a club. So, for example, I need to have a really good relationship with the head coach, but if I'm seeing too much with the head coach, then the players might not want to come anywhere near me. But then if I'm with the players too much, then the head coach might be getting, or any staff member might be getting annoyed that I might have information about players that they don't have. But because of confidentiality, I have to be really careful with what information I share or how I share it. So it can be really difficult in that sense.
Yeah. I remember encouraging you to come into gym sessions with me and the players, because it was always a very, I don't want to say a safe space, but it was a safe space. The players, there was rarely a coach in there. There was rarely anybody scrutinising them from a football perspective. There was usually me leading a session or one of the sports scientists, and it was an open forum for conversation. And I always found that you really got some serious insights into how the players are living their lives, how they're feeling, like what strains and stresses they're under. It would all play out in the simple conversations, but there was a lot of information to gather during those sessions. So you're right. I think from a sports science perspective or an S&C perspective, you become a member, you're a member of staff, but you become a person that they can trust, because you're not necessarily a coach. You're not making a decision whether they're going to play at the weekend. You aren't judging them on their footballing abilities. You're there to support them and help them. And I think that comes across. So there's a lot of information shared between that relationship. But I do think that it can be difficult to be a psych, because obviously as soon as you walk into a building and the players or athletes know you're a psychologist, oh, well, what does he want to know about me? What's he going to ask me? Is he analysing me? Like, is he
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
read my mind? Like,
yeah.
it's a difficult thing to do, to create a genuine relationship, to foster this kind of connection when, I don't know, sometimes people can be a little bit wary about your intentions.
Yeah, it's different, and you were really good at that, by the way. And I'm sure you still are in your applied roles in creating that safe space for people, for players. And normally at football clubs, it is like the sports scientist or the physio, because exactly what you said. There's no judgment there. You don't care whether they're in the team or not. So there's more of a, it's just, yeah, it feels safer. And I got so much work done in those gym sessions, or kind of being in and around the barn where the lads were doing prehab or rehab or whatever it was they were doing, because yeah, there was just kind of the pressure was off, as it were. And
Mhm.
more often than not, the coaches weren't in there, or kind of high level staff, as it were, weren't in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, but even for like that walking into the building as a psych, it's really difficult because I've got to perform as well. So like I need to show the value that I'm adding as well,
Yeah.
to the people that are bringing me in the building. So like whether that's the academy manager or performance director, or whoever it may be. But at the same time, it's really difficult to show what value you're adding straight away with people that have never met you before, especially in an environment like professional football where it is so like it can be mistrusting.
Mhm.
Like, especially if you're a player, it's like, what does this person want from me? Or, is he says it's confidential? Is it actually confidential? Because I've just seen him walk into the training pitch with the head coach. Like, what's he saying?
Yeah.
Um, so it's like this tension between getting quick wins to show your value to the people that are paying you, but then working long term with people, because like that's the best way that I've found it. If you force it on people, then they just kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
they just retract. And this is pretty common knowledge now. I've heard lots of psychs saying it, but it does kind of ring true that you could split the group into thirds. Like a third of the group is probably really engaged. A third of the group sits on the fence, where if you give them, if you give them a bit of encouragement, they'll engage. And then a third of the group is like, yeah, isn't even saying good morning to you when you walk past them in the corridor, and that's absolutely fine. But what I've found is that more often than not, the third that aren't really interested are the high performers, the people that are paying you the money want you to work with even more. So that can be like an interesting tension scene, and I've definitely had some interesting experiences of trying to engage with players that don't want to engage,
Mm.
because I've had pressure put on me to do work with them.
I agree. And I think, like you just said, that they can tend to be the higher performers. I suppose that comes back to the original question of, are they the higher performers because they found mechanisms of ways in which to deal with this pressure, this stress, being in the lens, being under the microscope all of the time? Is that why they are the better players, because they've already figured out some structures? And I'm not saying they've nailed it. I'm not saying they couldn't be helped, but have they figured out some ways in which to deal with the pressure that comes with being a professional athlete or a sports person?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. A lot of the time when you work with high performers, and I got really lucky with the transition stuff that I was working with, like multiple Olympians, gold medalists, all that kind of stuff. And you couldn't really do the traditional sports psych work, like mental skills training. So visualization, relaxation, self, all that kind of stuff, because they'd already got high levels of that they'd developed by themselves, because they wouldn't have got to where they'd got to. So more often than not, the work with those people is kind of broader than that. And that was the most frustrating thing from my point of view. And kind of like question yourself as a practitioner, like how do you help those players? Because they did have like high levels of self-awareness of how to navigate those challenges. But from my experience, a lot of them struggled with like the kind of the broader challenges. So, for example, if the high performing players that were kind of going up to the first team, dropping back down, and kind of almost in that no man's territory, what they were struggling with was that journey, that experience. It wasn't because they didn't know how to kind of visualize them scoring a goal or making a run, for example. It's that they didn't know how to they didn't have to deal with lack of feedback at a first team level compared to an academy level, or they didn't know how to deal with the fact that they'd just been rewarded with a huge contract and their life outside of the football club had changed drastically, and they'd have all these different pressures put on them. They performed to a good level, so therefore the expectation of what they could do had gone up even more. Because they were getting more high profile, they were probably getting more and more interest away from it, whether that be through agents or sponsorship. So more of the broader stuff, in my opinion, from what I saw, was what was potentially impacting their performance. But because they were already kind of resistant, or no, I'm good with that initially, it's really difficult to sell the broader stuff.
Yeah.
So what I found over time, I just kind of dropped being a sports psych, as it were, and I'll just walk to the training pitch with them, or I'll try and muscle in on a game of two-touch or whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden, in like the traditional sense, they've gone, no, I'm not interested in that. All of a sudden, you walk into the pitch and you're doing a session, and they don't even know about it.
Yeah.
So I guess you just have to be creative. But you are right. You will find that the high-level performers are pretty self-sufficient.
I do think that there's definitely areas though that they could always be helped. For sure. Do you have any, from your time in sport or just in your profession at all, really? Do you have any memorable experiences? So that could be either a positive or a negative experiences that have kind of shaped your approach to the role. So obviously some of the experiences from your own past have shaped how you are currently as a practitioner, but is there anything that's happened whilst you've been a sports psych or a performance psychologist that you've seen that's either positive or negative that you thought, I'm taking that, I'm using that, and that's going to be part of my practice?
Yeah, there's been loads. One of the biggest things that stuck with me, and again, it's like a contradiction or a paradox in that as a psychologist, everyone has their own philosophies, beliefs, how they see the world, how they practice, and this has become really apparent actually in the last year of kind of moving into the corporate business space. So traditionally, as a psychologist, you sell yourself. So there's no product other than yourself. Whereas what we've found in the business world is that people are like, well, what are you selling? And we're like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, you must have a product. And like, well, we don't know what we can support you with yet because we don't know what your needs are. So, but that's not good enough because they want to buy something. And the reason I'm telling you that is because when I was working in the transition space, I was really lucky to do a lot of traveling, and we did work with the NFL. And I remember sitting in their headquarters in New York, which is really cool. And they had like this role called like the head of player engagement. And he said something really powerful. He was like, I get people coming in here all the time trying to sell me something, trying to sell me a product, trying to sell me a support system. He's like, they don't know shit about my problems. He's like, they've never asked me what I need. And that really stuck with me. And I've kind of tried to stand by that, even with what I'm doing now. And it's really difficult to, in my opinion, to create a program and deliver a program unless you spend a significant amount of time with people to understand what they actually need.
Yeah.
And again, that can be really challenging, especially when you go into an environment like football where they want results quick. It's really difficult to say, like, I'm probably not going to do anything for like 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I'm just gonna be there and observe and develop relationships. Like, that's really uncomfortable to say to someone that's paying you money. You're like, what do you mean you're not doing anything? But I am doing,
Yeah.
I am doing something.
Yeah. It's
Do you know what I mean?
foundational what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that, I don't know if that's positive or negative, but that's just something that's really kind of stuck with me. Something that I think you probably know this story already, but like one of the things that's stuck with me in recent years was kind of at the end of my time in football was, and again, this is really difficult because you have to show value, but at the same time, you almost have to work in the shadows. So I got questioned by quite a high level member of staff about the work that I was doing, because in his perception, I wasn't doing any work because he never saw me with anyone doing any work. But I've done that on purpose because a lot of the players, a lot of the time, don't actually want to be seen to be doing work with me. And all this member of staff was wanting was information about players that he could use because, in my opinion, he wasn't doing his job properly. So he essentially had nothing to report back to his boss because he wasn't doing it. So he didn't have any information. So he was trying to lean on me because I think he saw me as a bit of a weak member of staff, in my opinion, to basically, get information about players. And he accused me of not doing anything, and I wasn't having it. And I'm not a confrontational person at all. And he kind of, he fronted me out in a scenario with another member of staff, which I thought was really unprofessional, and it caught me off guard. And I remember being really hard on myself on the way home, thinking, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I do this? And I spent a couple of days reflecting. And then I called this person out and asked for a meeting, and I just remained really calm, and I stated everything that I thought was wrong, how unprofessional it was, and it just kind of it made me reflect on a few things. It made me reflect on, like, does the environment make people behave like that? In quite a I don't know what the word is, quite an aggressive, untrusting way. Is that what the environment creates? And then I think it's really difficult to, like, I find it really difficult to stand up and challenge people in that environment, especially because, like, one, that's not me as a person, but two, I didn't really see it as my role because I was in 2 days a week. And I thought to create confrontation would be bad for me in my role and what I did. But I think it's important on reflection to call people out, even if it means that it's going to cause you, like, a bit of short-term discomfort. But there isn't that many roles in high-level sport, so you want to stay in the building. So I think it's really difficult to navigate that. And then I just think it's really important that you evidence everything that you've done to yourself more than anything. So what I did with this person was, like, okay, you were accusing me of being unprofessional and not doing any work, and yet I had all this evidence of all the work that I've done with players. So I think that can be a challenge, again, is just being seen as being visible and actually adding value in quite a complicated role.
Mm-hmm. I think what you've gone into there for me is almost like the underbelly of working in sport, what the things that aren't really spoken about. I've done quite a bit of academic delivery recently to undergraduate and postgraduate about the multidisciplinary team and how it works. On the surface, when you're discussing that, it seems like common sense. Oh, I work with a team of different disciplines. We all get along. We're all working to the same goal, and everything goes smoothly. And in reality, it's rarely like that.
Yeah.
Similar to the example that you've just put out there. And it's interesting what you say when the way that you put it was, is it the environment, or is it the culture that causes that feeling, that causes people to lean on other people, to pressure other people because they're under pressure? And I think that for me, that was a massive, we say, disillusionment for me. When I went into sport, I didn't know that. I had no idea about it. I didn't see it. I don't think anyone could have explained that to me unless you go through it and you see examples of it, whether that's with you, like you've just spoken about, or whether it's seeing somebody else go through something similar. But I do think that there's an environment of pressure, like you mentioned about the players themselves being under pressure. I think that staff are under huge amounts of pressure, and how that manifests is endless. It manifests in different ways for different people, and I do think that people change. People veer away from their own moral compass because they're under this pressure, and my boss is asking me to do this. And that person that you're talking about there may have confronted you in a very aggressive way, and because, like you said, they may have felt like they were being insufficient in their own roles, and they felt under pressure, and it may have veered them from their moral compass. If they're at home with their families, there might not be anything like that, but they acted in that way because of the pressures that they're under in their workplace. I think that's a huge piece to talk about. I don't even know how much research is out there about that area, but for me, like, I think a big part of the reason why I kind of stepped away from full-time sport was because of things like that. It didn't align with my own moral compass. It didn't. A lot of the things I was seeing and being asked to do, I wasn't comfortable with it, more as a human being on a moral level, rather than, oh, I don't want to. It was almost seen as like, oh, Dan's shirking work. He doesn't want to do that work because he's lazy. No, it's not because I'm lazy. It's because I don't agree with what you're asking me to do. That isn't. That's not part of who I am and what I am and what I want to become. Whereas I do think that some members of staff and potentially athletes and players themselves can be almost just lose their own moral compass to follow this pressure. And
well, I guess I can speak to that a bit more in that I've been in the change room as a player, and I've been in the change room as a member of staff now, and in my opinion, unfortunately, a lot of people most of the time are just wearing a mask to survive. I think as a player, you go into a new changing room. Let's say, so when I was 16, I've just been released by Walsall. I walk into a new changing room. There's a group of lads there, and there's at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 that don't want me in that changing room because I play in the same position of them. But it's very like, I think you can probably relate it back to how we've evolved in that I want to be accepted by this group of people, because if I'm not, it's not that I'm going to die by not being accepted by the tribe, but I'm not going to get a contract. I'm not going to be a professional football player. So therefore, what I've done in the past is like, you see the main characters and you either kind of align to how they are and join the herd as it was to fit in, or you kind of you're an outcast. And I think that can be the same as a member of staff. You, in order to survive and stay in the building, you align to like what the leader wants or what the influential people want. Because if you don't, then your life can be really challenging. And I think that's what I was talking about. Like, I sat in meetings in my roles where we've been talking about things, and in me, I'm like, I fundamentally disagree with this. Everything in my body, I can feel it in my body. I don't agree with this, and yeah, I'm going along with it because I want to stay in the building, and I don't want to. Firstly, I don't want the confrontation, and secondly, if I engage in discussing what my opposing views are, it's going to get shot down anyway. So in many ways, it's a waste of time. So it's either do that or don't do it and don't have a job, basically. So you kind of just essentially put on a mask, and it's something that I've heard a lot. It's something that I hear players talking about in one-to-one sessions, unfortunately. And how can you expect players to like thrive on the pitch if they're wearing a mask all the time, or if everyone in the environment's wearing a mask? Like, you know, you hear members of staff saying, "Oh, I want you to express yourself. I want you to be you." Like, what? How contradicting is that when most of the staff aren't doing that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's difficult. I think when things are, you can get really lucky. Like I think me and you experienced at different times, like groups within groups, where some members of staff are really good at protecting other members of staff, at creating like a little culture within the culture that was more conducive to high performance and actually seeing people as people. And that definitely had a positive effect on the players.
Yeah.
But it's in my experience, and I know like my experiences can be minimal to other people's, but it's kind of a bit of a common theme that you see.
Yeah. And what do you think it is about the positive groups that you've worked in, the positive MDTs, let's say, or the positive collaborations that you've had? What is it about those that makes them positive? Why are they good? Why does it work?
I think there's just if I think about the best one that I've worked in, I think everyone that was really good within that group were first and foremost just good people. Like, were genuinely interested in you as a person, and you developed a foundational relationship as a person. There weren't any egos. There's a lot of egos in football. And I think it's really powerful when someone that's been in professional football for so long and has had worked with ex-players that have had really good careers, that are still really open-minded and open to learning from people in different disciplines. And just no agendas. Like, what they say they do is what they do. There's nothing going on in the background, and just trust, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is trust, and it is that relationship of having no agenda, or to put it in another way, having the same agenda. Your agenda is to be open, to be trusting, and to want to help the group that you're trying to help, the team, the player, whatever it is. You've all got the same agenda. You want this person or this group of people to be better, and we're all going to come together, be honest with each other. And sometimes it sounds all rainbows and butterflies, but sometimes that can still be tough, because there needs to be conversations where, right, Dan, you've not done this well enough, you failed here, like, how are we going to make it better? And that's like, for me, that's the real definition of check and challenge. It's a safe space. Everybody's working towards the same end goal, but you can still have those conversations where, oh, you dropped the ball a little bit there, Dan. Let's do this next time. It's not an aggressive attack. It's a supportive, let's get this better next time. Let's push forward. And I feel like, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think that can only happen if you've got the foundation of like a good relationship and trust.
Yeah.
Similar to like being a psych, that I can only really do good work with someone if there's a foundation of trust, a relationship. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Brilliant. I suppose to wrap it up then, my last question to you is, I suppose you've gone through so many things, but what would be your top advice to a student who's looking to be a sports psychologist or a performance psychologist? What would be your biggest kind of, this is what you should do, this is my advice to you, this is where you should go?
I think probably number one is like grow your network. There's not that many jobs that are advertised, but people are in roles. And I think, similar to what we've just been talking about there, if people know you and trust you, then you're likely to get a phone call. I remember in my it my third year? Was it on my master's? I can't remember. Someone came in and did it was around applied practice, but I think it was Paul Russell actually. So he's head of psychology at the referees now, and he had a slide with Han Solo on it from Star Wars, and he's like, "Oh, are there any Star Wars fans?" And everyone was kind of like, "No, not really." And he's like, "Oh, this guy's Han Solo. He's the gatekeeper to the galaxy." And what he meant by that is that when he travels to every planet in the galaxy, he knows people. He was like, if you want to be, he was talking about being a consultant at the time. You want to be a consultant, you need a Han Solo. You need people to open doors for you, and that has been a fundamental thread throughout my career. I've never applied for a job, but I've always got a job through my network or developing relationships with people. And I think the earlier you can do that, the better. Because like I said at the beginning, like you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if no one is going to give you an opportunity, then it's kind of worthless. The second thing that I think is really important, and some of this you can't control. So like I had my experience of being a player. Like if someone hasn't got that experience, then they can't do anything about that. But, and again, it's difficult if you're slightly younger coming through the training pathway. But I think you might not have been an elite athlete, but we're all people. It's just the context is different, but we might have experienced similar things. So I think don't be afraid to draw on your life experiences, or go and actively give yourself life experiences that are going to add like depth and richness to your knowledge or your theoretical knowledge. Because I think that massively helps. Because I think what you have to do is you have to be quite creative with how you translate the theory when you practice. And if you can use real life as an anchor, then that can be really powerful for people to connect to.
I'd agree with that. I use analogies quite a lot, as you already know. And I think, like you said, sometimes, like your example there of someone using the Han Solo description and how that works, that was his way of transferring that knowledge. I think that's important. And I think the more experiences that you can get, whether they're practical experiences or just life experiences,
I
think that has value.
I always remember Mark Nesty. He's really he's quite controversial and funny when he's delivering, but he'd always say like, "Go and get a life." He's like, "Go and work on the door in the nightclub or something and get a life." But what he meant by that was like, go and get some experience away that is going to help like the depth of what you deliver.
Yeah, go and see some things.
Yeah.
Brilliant, Ben. I'm going to wrap it up there. That's been really inspirational for me. I found out a lot about you that I didn't know before we started this conversation. And I think it'll be really helpful to the people listening, just to give them ideas around your own experiences and what working in sport and performance psychology is like. I think one of the things that I haven't found difficult going into academia, but I think when we talk to students and I try to tell them the stories of what's happened and what it's like, it's really hard to relay that information. So to hear it from you as well, some of the similar drums that I've been beating, I think is really powerful. So thanks very much for that.
No, it's good stuff. I enjoyed it.